Our session today will look at the 2023 paper, and the first part was multiple choice. But before we go through multiple choice, I will invite you to my notes where we will understand some basic concepts that you will need to appreciate. So these notes are a summary of what you expect in that segment. So let's start with our introduction to research. So research is basically a systematic way of collecting and analyzing data and interpreting data to answering research questions. So in social sciences and business studies, research helps us to understand problems scientifically, to test theories and assumptions, and to make informed decisions. So research, therefore, can broadly be classified into quantitative research, qualitative, and mixed research methods. And quantitative has to do with numbers and statistics, whereas qualitative has to do with opinions, meanings, and experiences. And when you're talking about a mixed, it's a combination of both. So scientific research is structured into uh, chapters 1, which is the introduction, chapter 2, which is the literature review, chapter 3, methodology, chapter 4, analysis, chapter 5, discussion, chapter 6, conclusions and recommendations. So now in chapter 3, we have what we call our research methods, where we have a sampling element. So what does it mean to sample? It's simply a process of selecting a subset of individuals from a proportion of the population to representing the whole. So the whole population is called what? A census. A small component of the population is called what? A sample. So this is a population and this is a sample. And the unit, generally, this is what we call a sampling unit. Now, we have what we call probability and non-probability sampling methods. So we'll talk about what we call the non-probability sampling method. And an example we have is snowball. So snowball is a technique where the researcher will start with a few participants, as if you're doing an investigation. Then it swells into a big um, um, pool of data, like a snow grows. It keeps collecting information and collecting information. So these few participants will refer to others, and the sample will grow like a snow. So when is a snowball sampling used? When information is hard to reach population, for instance, in informal workers, drug users, immigrants. So this information is so hard to reach. And the limitation is that there's risk of bias because participants may refer to familiar people only. Then we have what we call a sampling frame. Sampling frame. What is a sampling frame? A sampling frame is a complete set of elements in a population from which a sample is drawn. And what are some of the examples of our sampling frame? For instance, a database of employees, voter register, a student list. These are all what we call a sampling frame. Okay, so it is important to have a sampling frame because it ensures that there's proper random selection and it reduces sampling errors. So I said there are two main groups of sampling. There's what we call probability and non-probability sampling method. All right. So what is the probability sampling method? This is where every member has an equal chance of being selected. So we have examples of probability sampling methods, which include simple random sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling. And we also have non-probability sampling methods, which assume all members have equal chance. Here, not all members have equal chance. Here, for probability, all members have equal chance. So the examples that we have may include quarter sampling, convenience sampling, and snowball sampling. These are all examples of what? Non-probability sampling method. So you need to explain what each of these methods entail. Are we together? You need to explain what each of these methods entail. So quarter sampling is not part of the probability sampling methods. It is a So quarter sampling is not part of what? The probabilities, a non-probability sampling method. So if I may to ask, um, what is involved in stratified sampling? What is involved is stratified sampling? Stratified sampling is where you're going to subdivide your um, respondents into strata, okay, into groups like top management, mid management, and lower management. So in each of these, you can pick maybe three of them. So here it will ensure that there's representation in all the levels of management. Are we together? How about cluster sampling? Who can explain what is involved in cluster sampling? Cluster sampling. So cluster is where we're going to, for instance, select the entire population into clusters like provinces. We have 10. Then out of the 10, you pick three provinces. Those are your clusters. So not all provinces will be represented in there. Are we together? So at least you need to have an idea of what each of these um, sampling types are. Are we together? Can somebody explain what quarter sampling is? So beyond just memorizing these for exam purposes, I would rather you understand each of these ones um, fairly. Okay? So you need to understand what each of these ones are. So can I assume you already know them?
No, most of them we're trying to understand now.
So the simple random sampling, where every member has an equal chance. For instance, when you're selecting employees from a list of the lottery, that is simple random. Stratified sampling is where you divide the population into what? Into groups or strata. Then you randomly select them from each group. Then also an example would be selecting students from each year of study. So you're going to pick them proportionally. Then cluster sampling is where you divide the population into clusters, all right? Then the entire clusters are randomly selected, like the whole schools in the district. Then you select any four. The non-probability sampling, I said, is simply a sampling method where not every member has an equal chance of being selected. And the selection here is based on the researcher's judgment, like convenience or referrals. So the characteristics here that it's not random. You select them subjectively. It's faster and cheaper, of course, but there's high risk of bias. Examples of non-probability sampling is quota sampling, where researchers will select what? Participants based on some fixed quotas or certain characteristics. For instance, select 50 male, 50 females for a study. And convenience sampling is where you're going to select participants based on what? Easy access. Conveniently, you want to select students near your classroom. And snowball is where the existing participant will refer to a new participant in study. For instance, you want to know the village banking societies that are there, you know who knows who. All right? So that is very important. We go to the component of the literature review. What is the meaning of literature review? So literature review basically is what? Is a systematic and critical examination of existing studies and theories or publications. So literature review therefore helps us to understand what has already been studied. Literature review helps us identify the gaps and avoid duplication in research. Literature review is there to build a strong foundation for our current study and also to justify our research. So literature review can be systematic. We have different types of literature review. There's what we call systematic literature review. It is simply a carefully planned and transparent and replicable method of reviewing your existing literature using clear methods. So systematic literature is one which is more structured than a normal literature. So the features that are there in a systematic literature, number one, there's a clear search strategy. The researcher here clearly defines how and where the literature will be researched in databases. It also includes what we have, the inclusion or exclusion criteria, where you're going to set rules for the studies to include in your studies and what you're going to leave out. It also looks at bias reduction, where it reduces personal opinions or preferences when you're selecting studies. And also, it has a feature of reproducible process where another person can follow the same steps and get the same result. So there are steps in literature review that you need to identify. So a good literature review must first start by you identifying your research problem. The researcher here will define the topic. What problem do I want to study? Then the researcher will search relevant literature through journals, books, and databases and keywords. Then he will read and evaluate these sources, and each of them will be studied carefully, and you select those that are relevant to your study, and you organize information in themes and categories to understand causality, and just searching deeply what theories are relevant for your study, and you are going to identify the gaps in your literature. So here is an important part. Gaps in literature, basically you identify what hasn't been studied or explained by any other people. So these are the steps that you need to look at. You identify the problem, search relevant literature, read and evaluate and organize that information and study the gaps that are there. All right? You need to understand that not do not list references one by one. Instead, you need to put your ideas together. Now let's look at the idea of primary and secondary data sources. What are primary and secondary data sources in research? So when you're dealing with information, we classify them into two groups, the primary and secondary, depending on how close they are from the original data. So the primary sources are the original first-hand information. And these information are information that are directly collected by you as a researcher, being the original author. So these ones have original content. They include methodology, how data was collected, the raw first-hand data, and they're more accurate and reliable. Examples of primary information have journals, questionnaires, interviews, and experiments. So it's important in research because they'll provide with evidence for research. We also have secondary data sources, which may include what others have done, summaries or analysis of other researchers. They don't contain original data. Features of secondary sources may be already published data, summaries of interpretation, and also these are easy to read and interpret. Examples of secondary data may include textbooks, encyclopedias, and commentaries, and these are important for helping us to gain general understanding about a topic or have some background of some information. So the differences between the two is that primary data has original information and more detailed and reliable and initiated by you, the researcher, like the journals and articles. And secondary data is an interpretation from the original. It's less detailed, it's more general, and it's by somebody else, like a textbook, right? So these are basically what we're talking about here. So we also look at a research proposal. What is a research proposal and what is involved in research proposal? You, by the end of this week, as you're writing an exam, will be expected to submit your proposals. Others have already done simply a blueprint of the study prepared before the actual research. Okay, the importance of a proposal is that it helps you clarify ideas before starting a research. So it prepares a roadmap for your research process. And the key component of a proposal is that it should have a title within 12 words, must be clearly stating what you want to research, and must be specific, clear, and concise. All right, that's a background of study, which is an overview of the research, explaining the general context and existing trends. Problem statement, which should also talk about the key issue that you want to study, the gap, why the problem is being investigated. So a good statement of the problem must be clear, concise, and must have evidence-based facts, must have objectives that must be smart, categorized into two general and specific objectives. It must also have a hypothesis or research questions. These ones are mutually exclusive. In your school guide, if you have one, you shouldn't have the other. So research questions are qualitative in nature. They will give you a guide of what you want to explore, whereas hypothesis is quantitative in nature to predict relationships. Then you go to the literature review, which will guide your topic, showing what others have done, the gaps in your knowledge, and also identifying the current study. Methodology is very important because it will show how the research will be conducted. The design, is it quantitative, qualitative, or mixed? The sampling techniques that I've been talking about, the collection method, whether it's questionnaire or interview, the population and sample size, data analysis methods, and also ethical considerations. So data analysis plan will show you how data will be collected and processed. All right? Then you go to your conclusion of your research. So basically, this is what is involved. Then we also have what we call the methodological plan or section. This is the smallest chapter, yet the most, uh, let me say, sensitive chapter, because it looks at what? The overall plan of how you're going to collect your data. We have common types of designs: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. The quantitative basically is numerical. You're looking at statistics. Qualitative uses interviews and observations. Mixed, you combine both. Basically, the purpose of a research design is to give alignment with objectives and how you're going to collect your methodology. Your methodology. It also improves your validity and reliability. So we also have what we call a sampling technique, which shows how participants will be selected from the population. So we have probability and non-probability sampling methods that I talked about. So random sample, stratified and cluster are examples of probability methods, which use numbers. And non-probability methods, we use convenience, snowball, and purposive. So the purpose of sampling technique is basically to ensure there's representativeness and to reduce bias. Then you go to your data collection tools in your methodology, which will look at how you're going to gather information through questionnaires, interviews, and observations. The purpose basically is to check the accuracy of your data. So data analysis methods basically look at how your data is being processed and interpreted. So we have quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. So quantitative uses what? Statistical tools like SPSS, Excel, whereas qualitative uses thematic analysis or content analysis. Then you have your ethical consideration that has rules of how to protect your participants to ensuring that there's integrity. All right. So basically, that is what is there. Then we also have the element of what? The variables and measurement. This is where your SPSS part comes in. Of course, you may not be asked to ensure to do an SPSS how to enter, but at least you must have an idea of your SPSS. So we have variables that either be independent or dependent variables. So variables are simply characteristics or factors that change how you're going to measure your study. So the independent variables basically are the factors that cause changes in another variable. They're also called predictor or explanatory variables. These are variables that we can manipulate. For instance, if you're looking at stress and productivity, stress level is what your independent variable because you can manipulate it. Independent variable is the outcome that you want to measure. Right? It is not controlled by the research, it's simply the result, the effect. For instance, productivity is what is your dependent variable. And measurement scales are simply scales that clarify or measure these variables, and they actually determine your statistical analysis. So we have what we call an ordinal scale, we have what we call an interval scale, we have what we call a nominal scale. What is an ordinal scale? It is a scale that provides ranked data where you're concerned about order, all right, between the values. It shows order or ranking, okay? Intervals between ranks cannot be equal. So it cannot measure exact differences. For instance, second, third, fourth in race. So we are looking at examples of satisfaction. There's low, medium, and high. These are class rankings. They're important to comparing what positions. And we have also interval data, which looks at a scale with equal intervals between values, but it has they do not have a 0 point. The feature is that there's equal spacing, there's no absolute zero, and allows what? Addition and subtraction, like temperature, IQ scores, okay, years, The importance of these that they allow for statistical analysis in that ordinal data when you are analyzing your SPSS. Then we also have what? Ratio and nominal. Okay, what happens in ratio? Ratio, we're looking at equal intervals, there's no zero, like a pie chart. So what is the importance of the measurements in quantitative research? They help in accuracy, consistency, comparability, and what? Statistical analysis. Then we go to data analysis, SPSS. SPSS stands for a statistical package for social sciences. It's a software, all right? So in SPSS, you may be asked to look at the two kinds of view. There's the data view and the variable view, okay? You did the practice for SPSS, right? What is involved in SPSS, those that did,
Yes, we did.
I'll be having a seminar for those ones at CBU to learn how to do SPSS. Okay, these are exam periods, so you guys can join as well. Then you learn how to use this software conveniently. It will give you good money as a independent researcher or consultant. So SPSS helps us to analyze and manage data, to generate tables and pie charts. It's important because it simplifies complex information. Okay, so SPSS has been described to having names and labels. These is saved for different purposes. So we have what? The variable name. It's a shorter identifier in SPSS. All right. So it will give you a full description of a variable. So we have length. It is a short and simple variable name. It is longer than a description. There's the purpose of these is that they are used for coding. So the variable name is actually used internally by SPSS users to give short names. There are no spaces. Where the variable level, you are able to give your full description. What is the advantage of using SPSS? Number one, saves time, reduces human error, it handles large data sources, and also has standardized outputs. Right. Then we go to our methodology. I talked about methodology already, appearing many times. So methodology, we said it is simply a blueprint, a plan, a strategy of how you're going to conduct your research. All right. So the functions that it simplifies the methods and procedures. So research design will actually state how data will be collected and measured. It also justifies the methods that are being used. It explains why certain techniques are chosen while others are left out. It has control variables, which helps the researcher to manage or reduce the influence of external factors. So research design ensures that the study is not random. Then we also have what we call a control or variance. Control or variance. So variance basically is simply the deviation from our expected outcomes, right? So the control variance means that you want to ensure that these changes of the results are mainly due to independent variables. So you want to reduce the influence of unwanted factors, the external factors. So you want to improve the accuracy. So the results should actually reflect the true relationship that exists between independent and dependent variables. So we have external influences that come like the environment, the biasness, all these should be minimized. That's why we talk about the aspect of what? Control variance. And there's an issue of validity in research. We've heard of validity. Validity comes as internal or external validity. What is validity? Validity basically looks at the extent to which the data measures what we intended to measure. It shows whether the results are accurate. So internal validity is used to measure whether the results are truly a reflection of causality. Okay, and external validity measures the extent to which the findings can be generalized to other populations. So that's what we are talking about. Then we go to the aspect of hypothesis. What is hypothesis in research? Hypothesis is simply a statement that is testable. We have the null and the alternative hypothesis. It is a testable statement that predicts a relationship between two or more variables. So it is a quantitative aspect. The importance is that it gives direction of the research and helps in data collection. There are two types of hypothesis. Is what we call directional hypothesis, which predicts the direction of the relationship, whether negative or positive. There's also a non-directional relationship. This one states that there is a relationship between variables, but does not specify which direction, right? So these are the two that you need to understand. So statistical significance, we have what we call the alpha, okay, or the confidence levels that show the statistical. Whenever we reject H or we mean that there's a statistical significance. So statistical significance is the probability that the results of the study are not caused by random chance, but as a result of the actual relationship or the difference between the populations. So what statistical significance shows is that the outcome is due to chance, meaning that the results happen randomly and may not be uh, a reflection of real population. Okay, then we also need to understand the aspect of validity and reliability. What's the difference between these two? What is validity and reliability, and how do we use these concepts? So now, validity looks at, let me start with reliability. Reliability looks at consistency of a research instrument over time. A study can be reliable if it produces the same results if repeated over time. That is what? Reliable. Like a scale at home. If can be wrong but reliable. A reliable liar is a reliable instrument. So you have to stick to your no or to your yes. It ensures that they are stable results and consistent and reduces randomness. Okay? And validity is the accuracy of the instrument, the extent to which it will tell you what it's supposed to measure. So if it's giving you wrong results, it's not what? Valid. It may be consistent or reliable, but it's not valid. So valid measures correctness in short. Are we together? Then we look at what a pilot study is or pilot test. You've heard of a pilot test? A pilot test is basically what? What is a pilot test? Anyone? So a pilot test is simply a small scale what? It's a small scale um, study that is conducted before the actual research actually takes place. That's what we call a pilot test. So you'll be encouraged to do um, a pilot test before you are sure. Okay, all together.
Yes.
That is called a pilot test. So a pilot test is simply um, a sample or preliminary study that we use when we want to run the actual study. It's important because it detects errors in the questionnaire and improves clarity of the questions and what tests the structure and improves the quality. Okay. So there are ethics in research that we need to adhere to. What are some of the ethics that you need to adhere to? So ethics basically are acceptable norms. Okay. They refer to the act of somebody's so plagiarism is the act of using somebody else's work, their words, their findings, okay, without giving proper credit to them. So plagiarism is simply copying without credit or bringing out somebody else's ideas without as claiming them as your own. So plagiarism is wrong, it's unethical, it violates what academic rules and loses originality. So the ethical norms that we need to understand. Then we look at what types of data. We have what we call um, continuous or categorical data. So data can be classified depending on how it's being measured. So continuous data is simply numerical data that can take any value within a range, can be measured. The features are that it has a measurable scale. It can include decimals and fractions. It can represent quantities, e.g. kilograms, height, and temperature. Categorical data, on the other hand, is data that is grouped into categories rather than measured numerically. The features of categorical data is that it represents group and cannot be measured numerically, and it's used for classification. Examples, male, females. Okay. So we also look at what um, some of the key concepts. So we've talked about all these. So now I hope we are ready for going through our 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 exam paper. So question number one, snowball is a method of choosing a sample using what? Quarters, groups, clusters, and collections. What was our answer? What's our answer? What's our answer? I already mentioned the answer for this one. It's none of it's none. Okay, because snowball is not about choosing what? Um, any of these. So a systematic literature is one which starts with your own library, then goes to online databases, then finally the internet. A replicable, scientific, and transparent process, one which gives you equal attention to principal contributors, one which is responsible and professional process of time management, none of the above. What's our answer there?
Is it B?
So it is B, yes. It's replicable, it's scientific, and it's a transparent process. So it follows a structured, transparent method so that other researchers can repeat the process and get their similar results. Okay, question number 3, what would be included in a proposal? What would be included in a proposal? Your academic status, difficulties you encountered, your choice of methods, all of the above. So it's your choice of methods and reasons for choosing them. So a proposal must include methodology and justification, not just the history or difficulties. All right? We go to question number 4. What is the difference between interval ratio or ordinal variables? A, the difference between categories is equal across the range of interval ratio data. B, ordinal data can be ranked, but interval data cannot. C, interval data variables contain categories. Ordinal variables have 0 point, whereas interval variables do not, or none of the above. Our answer is what? A, the distance between categories are equal in interval stroke ratio data. So the interval ratio data have what? Equal spacing between the values, like I said, while ordinal only shows ranking. Question number 5. A test of statistical significance indicates how confident the researcher is about the intercoder reliability of the structured schedule, the establishing the validity measurement of the pilot study, understanding the difference between bivariate and multivariate study, generalizing the findings from the sample. So our answer, question number 5, is D, generalizing from a sample to a population. That's the significance of statistical significance. So it shows whether the results from the sample can be applied to a wider population. Number 6, the importance of measurement in quantitative research is that it shows us to delineate the differences between people and cases. It improves consistency. It allows precise estimation, or the above, none of the above. Answer 6 is what? All of the above, because measurement helps with precision, comparison, consistency, and relationship analysis. Okay, is that clear? Someone to try question number 7. In SPSS, how is a variable name different from the variable label?
I think A.
A. Number 7, A. Yes, it's shorter and less detailed. So the variable name are short codes with labels. All labels are full descriptions. That's correct. Number 8, a research design serves two functions: specifying methods and procedures, justifying these methods. The second function is also called control of variables, research design, um, study design, construct, or variance. That's our answer. Control variance. Okay, it ensures that the changes in the results are due to the independent variables only. Okay, question number 9. The advantage of SPSS over calculating statistics by hand is that this is how most quantitative data analysis is done in research. It reduces chance of making errors. It equips you with useful transferable skills. All of the above, none of the above. Question number 9. Our answer is B. It reduces chance of making errors in calculation. So SPSS does volumes and volumes by minimizing human errors. Number 10, high morale leads to high productivity is an example of what type of hypothesis? Statistical, simple, research, hypothetical, research, directional, research, none of the above. What's our answer? Directional hypothesis, because it looks at the positive direction. High morale leads to high productivity. That's a positive direction. It's an example. I gave you examples of hypothesis. All right? Then internal validity refers to whether there is really a causal relationship between variables, whether there are findings or relevant participants in our everyday lives, the degree to which the researcher feels that his um, this is worthwhile project and how accurately measurements are represented underlying the concept, none of the above. So question number 11 is A, whether there is really a causal relationship between the two variables. So it checks if the independent variable truly causes the effect of the dependent variable. So we end here for today. I'll ask you to answer the latter part of the questions on your own as your homework. Thank you so much for your time. We end here.